Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and it is cold outside. Today we are going to do one of my favorite outdoor techniques inside. But before I explain more about the project, I would like to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Deb. Deb, thank you so much for being my lab partner today and supporting this episode of Dyepot Weekly. I discussed this a bit in some recent cool vat dyeing videos, but the difference between a cool vat and a solar dyeing project is that when you're doing solar dyeing, you're taking advantage of the heat of the sun to set the color on the yarn. However, a lot of times I set up projects as solar dyeing that really could be done indoors without the heat of the sun. I just need to heat set it after the fact. And that is what we are going to do today. Today we are going to layer acid dye powder and yarn in a jar, set it up, but since it's winter, we're not going to stick it outside. We're going to keep it inside for 24 hours or so and then heat set it, probably in the jar that I set everything up in. Because I think it's important to finally separate the solar dyeing effect of the heat of the sun from layering things inside a mason jar and giving time for those colors to spread out. Because I love the effect of layering the colors in the jar and seeing what happens and that surprise. But there's no reason why that can't be done inside. Over the summer, I did an experiment where I set one up with vinegar and without vinegar and found that the colors pretty much stopped spreading after, it seemed like around 6 to 8 hours. Like adding extra days didn't cause the colors to completely equilibrate in the jars. So we'll see what we're gonna see, but this is my plan. So again, a cool vat technique just means that you're setting things up cold for a long period of time. And then your cool vat is solar dyeing if you're leaving it outside so that way it gets that heat from the sun. And these can be combined in a lot of different ways. But today, if I were to stick it outside, then we'd get an ice cube. And that is not what we want. So let's go get started. Today we are gonna dye some Knit Picks Swish DK yarn. This yarn is 100% superwash merino. I dye it a lot, it's beautiful. And I'm gonna set it up in 2 different jars so that way we can see the differences between them. Now I'm debating whether or not I want to add the yarn dry or not. And after going back and forth right now, as I'm filming, I think I actually want to add the yarn to the jars dry, because that way when I layer on the powder, it's not immediately going to dissolve and stick where I put it, but instead as we pour the water in, that will cause that dye to spread and soak into the yarn as it desires, I suppose. The colors we are going to combine today are Dharma Sea Spray Electric Violet and Hyacinth. Now, because we're adding the dry powder directly into the jars, these 2 colors won't necessarily appear very pastel at all. These color swatches more reflect the colors that you get when you mix 1 gram of dye on 100 grams of fiber. So we'll see what we get. The electric violet and the hyacinth could be really, really similar, or it could give us a few different notes. But we'll be layering these powders in the jars in a very similar way. Now it's decision time again. I have 1 quart or 2 quart jars that we could use for today's project. Now in the past, I think I've done even 300 grams in one of the large jars. And you can see right now, oh, that yarn fills it really, really well. But as we add the liquid, the yarn will compress more into the jar. And so for comparison's sake, we've got the smaller jar. And I really have to compress the yarn a lot more, but I believe that these small jars are the ones that I used. I think. Clearly, this is an experiment that we can also try another day with small versus big jars. I think I'm inclined to stick with the small jars today because that was my plan, but We'll see if I regret it. There's always a chance that I'll regret it. Since we are dealing with dry dye powder, I am wearing safety glasses, a respirator mask, and gloves. So if I sound more muffled, that is why. Please always make sure you're wearing appropriate safety equipment when playing with powders. So now, what I'm going to do is add a tiny bit of yarn into the jar. And then, let's see, we're going to start with some electric violet. And I've got a spoon, and I'm going to take a little bit of powder and add it on here. I don't really want to add it in clumps. So if it's a little clumped, I will try to spread it out a little bit. The yarn, since the yarn is dry, that does help with this. The goal is to add similar amounts on both skeins, but we will be doing our best. Okay, and now I'm going to add some yarn in. Sort of tilt it over this way. Next, I'm going to add some sea spray. Adding this in here. Adding this in here. That is looking pretty purpley. So I push the yarn in, sort of rotating the side where I'm placing it a bit. It's not, these skeins will not be identical, but the goal is to add similar amounts of the dye colors. Okay, I'm coming in with some of the, what is this, the Hyacinth. Adding that. Some of these colors are going to be more towards the outside, some will be more towards the interior. Some more sea spray. I don't think I've done this with decay before. Okay, and let's do a little bit with some electric violet here. And then push with a little bit of a flip. I'm going to do a little bit of some Hyacinth on the other side. Do the same over here. I did get some on the counter that we will need to clean up before I remove the mask. Okay, pushing the rest of the yarn in. And then on top, I'm coming in with some sea spray. Gonna get a little more. Okay, like so. Now I'm going to close all of these jars. Okay, and there's a tiny bit on the counter, so I'm going to go get a paper towel to wipe that up. Now I'm going to start adding a liquid. So I've got just half a cup of plain tap water. Oof. And I'm adding it on, and it's not going anywhere. I think the Swish Decay is not quite as absorbent, and so it's going to take a little while. I am seeing it slowly start to leak down.
process. I cannot remember, to be honest, if I have done this with Swish before. I don't think so. I think it's just been Stroll. So I am, there we go, pressing down just for the top. I'm not going to try to help the liquid much anywhere else, but this is going to be really, really cool. Okay, it's soaking down slowly. Oh, it's looking really cool on that side. That's cool, yeah, it's sort of finding its own, if I turn this around, you can see it's sort of finding its own path. Okay, I think this means, well, let's go ahead and do one more half cup, about a quarter cup, because that's what it can fit. And okay, since that is soaked in a bit more, I'm going to add another approximate quarter cup of water in here. There we go. And then we're going to get ready with some vinegar. So in about now 600 milliliters of water, I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4 tablespoons of white vinegar. So now for the first time, we're going to start introducing some acid into these jars. And since there is still some visible powder on the top, I am continuing to wear my respirator mask, but I am working to dissolve that so that way I can remove it, and it's just about done. So I'm going to wipe down the counter and remove my mask.
Okay, a lot of fun things are happening around here right now. It looks very blue on top. I'm seeing what looks like some breaking and more green going there. And then over here, I've got a massive purple section. This is looking so unbelievably cool and watercolor. Oh, I mean, I don't want to alter gravity, but just check that out. That is so cool. Okay, now I am coming in with more of our water and vinegar, adding about a half a cup at a time. Now that the top is wet, it is soaking in a bit more. There might still be some white left behind when we do this, and if there is, that's okay. Part of the fun of this technique is not knowing exactly how things are going to spread and move. In general, you do end up with more pigment towards the bottom just because of the way you're pouring, but that's a reason why I always like to add some dye to the top. I am surprised by how much green there is. Ooh, I mean, the water has clearly found a path in here, and I'm seeing more purple at the bottom. This one is just looking so cool. So cool. Okay, I have almost used up I'm not really measuring anymore, I'm just sort of going back and forth. Whoops. The water with the acid. Alright, I've got another 600 milliliters of water. This time there's just 2 tablespoons of white vinegar in it. So I am still adding acid, and I will just be filling as it lets me fill. So I'm sure we will have some white and pastel sections. I have no idea how far the color will spread, and that is part of the fun. But I did not go rewatch the video for the first time I layered the powder in here, but this is something I've done a lot with either twisted mini skeins or full skeins. I just don't think I've done this exact base. And so how quickly the bases absorb water can make a big difference in here as well. And woohoo, that purple. I feel like I added the purple in a few different areas. There's definitely some color that is in the interior, not around the outside as well. Oh. These acid dye colors will start striking to the yarn relatively quickly. And so even without a lot of heat, which is why I enjoy this, because I like the way that the colors spread out on the yarn. And so now I'm just adding some plain tap water until everything is completely, until it seems like I can't add any more. The areas, there's a few areas that are looking dry, but right now it is mostly looking pretty wet. I am so curious with how this is going to look. And the thing is, if I am not happy with the way the color coverage is, we can always over dye it. So if I feel like the colors are too patchy, we'll take one of these colors that we used and add more on, just so that way we can get like more, I guess, balance or evenness in the depth of color. But who knows? We might be really impressed, and it's possible that the only white we see is the white we see around the outside. We don't know yet. Oh, cool. Okay, I'm being bad. I poked it, so I should poke this one for evenness. We've got to be close to the total amount of volume that we can add. And my reason for saying that is because there's only 4 cups of water total in these 2 jars. Okay, I am gonna let this settle as it is for about 10 minutes, and then I'll come back. There's still a couple dry pockets, but this seems like it is pretty well set. So now I'm gonna add lids on, which aren't really essential. It's not essential that it's sealed. You just don't want to like spill it or anything like that. But now I'll just be wiping down the area, and then I will be setting these aside for at least overnight. But here is one of the jars. Ooh, I see some white down there. There's a lot of resist in here because of how the yarn was packed in, but I'm really curious how it'll look, if it'll look exactly what we see, or just how much color coverage we have. The one thing about this technique is that it's random and you don't know what exactly is going to happen. What we do know, however, is that we will see some amount of spread, which we can see on the outside. We just don't know the extent to which the colors will spread. Now tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, we will have a choice. We can remove the yarn and then set it as it is. So we could remove the yarn and say put it in a pot of water and let anything residual that hasn't bound expand around the yarn, or we can heat set it in these jars. So I'd probably remove the lids because I don't exactly need to pressurize them and can it, but I can put it in a pot of some hot water and let it get heat that way, still being compressed as they are in the containers. So those are both reasonable choices here. Which way would you go about it? Let me know down in the comments. And clearly I'm gonna pick just one. We'll go with that today, but we can set this up and do this again on another day if you'd like to see more. It's been a couple of hours and I haven't really seen much movement since I added things, but we will check back in tomorrow. Let's give it a good 24 hours before we open this up and see what we got, or heat set it. I still haven't quite decided yet. It has been about 24 hours and there really hasn't been a significant change to the spread here in these jars. So now I want to heat set it, but before we really get started, I am going to remove the lids to these jars, purely just because I really don't need to seal it in. We could completely cover this and have it be more like a tanning water bath, but that really isn't necessary. I do have the yarn inside a pasta insert in my dedicated dye pot, and I'm now going to fill this up until the water is just below the surface of the jars. All right, and now let's move to the stove. All right, I'm gonna turn on the heat. And there's so much water in here, it will take a while to heat up, but I want the pot and the water in the pot to be warm for at least 30 minutes. So maybe it'll take closer to an hour since I'm starting with a cool bath. I know I mentioned this already, but I really want to try this using the bigger jar. I know I've dyed 100 grams of sock yarn in these containers multiple times in the past. I'm not sure if I started with it pre-soaked, so things were more compressed, but it really did feel like I was pushing things together a lot more. But I am so curious with how this colorway is going to look. Anyway, I am going to cover this, and after things have heated for 30 minutes, I will come back and we'll check in. It took probably around 40 minutes for me to get the pot up to temp, but now you could see it was at a boil. The yarn in our jars is nice and hot, and now I want to let it cool until I can comfortably remove the jars. I could lift this out like so and let it cool that way, but there's no harm in leaving it in the bath a little longer to get a little bit more heat. But anyway, once it is cool, maybe not completely cool, but the yarn is cool enough so that way I can really comfortably handle it, then we'll take it out of the jars and see what the colorway is. I've got our 2 jars. I'm gonna set one aside, and I also have 2 zip ties on hand to try to get a handle on the yarn. And ooh, this is pretty. Now, to try to avoid a tangle, what I'm doing right now is looking for one of the ties, which unfortunately I see towards the bottom. So I'm going to pick up the yarn towards the tie and then attempt to roughly separate it by that. And I'll want to double check that everything is well ordered, but by putting a zip tie on here, this will help me keep from making things less ordered. All right, so let's take a look at the yarn. The nice thing is I don't see any color in the liquid, and ooh, I see some hints of yellow. So we've got some breaking for sure. I think I see like a deep tealish green here, and this is really pretty. The coverage is more even than I really thought. There's a lot of white, but I think that's because of just how tightly wound this was in the jar. So let's look at, I'm gonna quickly just set this aside. Aha! And here's an observation. Remember how much I had to push the yarn when it was dry to get it in the jar? Maybe in the past I pre-soaked it, because if it was damp, I think it would have been a little easier. Not that the colors would have spread more, but see how much easier it is to just fit the wet yarn in? Okay, here is our other one. And woohoo! Okay, this one sort of separated itself right away. I'm really excited to compare these colorways to each other, and just because the placement of all the colors is going to be so random. Oh, this is fun. And so this is, if I were to have done solar dyeing with this, with the exception of the heat setting, the color would have been the same. The thing about the technique that made a difference really is that I just wasn't outside and it was at room temperature versus being warmer. Now, your room temperature can make a difference. I'm not seeing any color come out. Your room temperature, how hot it is inside your home, could make a difference, because there's some colors that if your home is, say, 60 degrees Fahrenheit versus closer to 70, that could be a tipping point in how some colors may or may not absorb. But we let the colors spread and then the heat set it. So that can probably counteract things. Now, I think that if we had more space in our jars, then we might have been able to see some colors spread further. Or, oh, I remember what it is that I liked to do. I like to add dry powder, but then make a mixture that had some dye in it to pour over. That's another fun thing to do. And gosh, I can't remember if I've done exactly that, but I am making a note of that in my notebook to basically do this setup again, but instead of pouring over clear liquid, which we would do towards the end, to pour over a dye mixture and see how far that travels. Ooh, that would be fun. All right, but anyway, I've been washing this a while. I am not seeing any color come out, so I am going to rinse out the rest of the soap, put this through my spin dryer, and hang it up to dry. Deb, this yarn turned out so cool. There are definite differences between them, but given that I think that there's probably a bit of asymmetry within each of the skeins and that we don't have a perfect repeating color, I think that they could still work really amazing together. We combined 3 different colors together for this colorway: Hyacinth, Electric Violet, and Sea Spray. And I see way more than 3 colors in here, which makes sense because of the blending. But check out the blue and then this turquoise that we got. Like, that's so cool. And then there are a few patches where it seems like we've got some brighter green. And here there's even a little bit of yellow. What a surprise. What accounts for the differences in here, especially the blue and then the deeper green? It's hard to say exactly, just because clearly I think something's breaking. Like maybe the Sea Spray that's got to be the source of the yellows and stuff. And now I'm blanking. I want to go back to one of my old swatches to see what the Hyacinth looks like. The Hyacinth is definitely closer to what I would expect for the Electric Violet. Like, I would say that this brighter purple is probably the Hyacinth, and this deeper bluish purple right here is the Electric Violet. So that means that the Sea Spray maybe isn't well mixed, or maybe the yellows strike faster, and so we're seeing some breaking in between this more green and this more blue. And so I think that it has to be some breaking. This means that Sea Spray is going to need to be a color that I explore further. I think, goodness, I don't know if people have spoken about it breaking in the past, but I do believe I can recall discussions in the Indie Dyer business owners group of people getting a new batch of Sea Spray and have it looking more blue or more green and trying to figure that out. So it's possible that, you know, it's not well mixed within the jar, or that really it does just break. But these kinds of things are fun, and it's one of the reasons why I enjoy layering colors in jars, because you don't know how things are going to turn out. I will say that the balance of color within the skeins are pretty good. There's good coverage and not huge patches of white that are just uninterrupted without any of the other color. Just quickly going through my swatch images, I also can't find a swatch of Sea Spray. So have I really not played with this color ever before? I must have, but I can't find it. So I'll have to keep looking. If you know of a video where I swatched it in the past, please let me know down in the comments. As I said, when you layer things in mason jars, you never quite know what you're going to get. And I don't have any real regrets from today. I have notes on how I might want to modify things moving forward. And one of those is that maybe I'd like a larger jar, or I should go ahead and pre-soak the yarn first, so then it doesn't feel quite as compressed as I'm layering things. But if the yarn is wet, then the dye is going to start like dissolving and sort of absorbing into that one spot, so maybe it won't spread as much. So those are all things that you have to consider. One other thing that I like with solar dyeing techniques is to take some dilute dye at the end, like a pastel color, and pour that over the yarn. That can help minimize the white and add another color variable to the mix that can be really, really fun. All things considered, there are a lot of similarities between these two skeins. Granted, I did use approximately the same amount of dye and I tried to layer it in the same way, and they're not identical, but they could have been more vastly different. So, Deb, today's lab partner, I recommend that when you use these in a project, it could be worth blending them together a bit, alternating skeins, but also, since I mentioned there's probably asymmetry within the skeins, there might not be a harsh shift when you shift from one to the other because there might be color shifts within these skeins already. Deb, thank you so much for being my lab partner today and supporting this episode of Dyepot Weekly. If you would like to learn more about how you as a viewer can become a lab partner, go and check out the listings in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. There are two different listings, lab partner and last minute lab partner, and the main difference is whether or not the bulk of the video has been filmed before or after you sign up. If this feels confusing or you would like a little more clarification before you sign up, please reach out to me on Etsy and I'm happy to chat about it with you. But again, please only reach out to me on Etsy if you have questions about any of my listings. If you have questions about yarn dyeing, leave them in the comments below. I do check for comments and I try to reply to as many questions as I can. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and please subscribe and turn on your notifications so you never miss a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.